today, yeah, I wanted to share with you some ideas about listening acts for justice and social change, which in conversation with Juanita, I understood that that's, I think, at the core of the challenges that you face, and that's to get not just perhaps judges and the society in general, but also politicians, to listening not just for justice, but also for social change. And I will propose some ideas there for that. I started with this image because I think one of the challenges in doing this kind of work that I do, but probably the one that you do as well, is that there is always, say, one individual among many who wants to be heard, right? It's not just one person, there are many people. And then immediately there are a number of big questions, like, so for instance, in my work, why do I choose to work with these 2 or 3 people and not with the others? So basically, immediately it shows you that working with listening and getting people to be heard is an ethical problem. There is an ethical question. Obviously, it's also political, but it's fundamentally ethical. So what is my relationship and my promise to them? How will their voice be heard? Who will hear that voice? In what context? So I think that raises an important question, which is, what does it mean for, in your case, what does it mean for victims of corruption to be heard effectively? And obviously, I mean, you are the experts. I don't have the answers. To me, the question is simply provocative, because as you know, legal frameworks very often are very rigid in saying who is a part in a process, who can be heard. And even when they are allowed to be heard as parts, very often their legal system is asking for them very specific questions, and they are not asked to share perhaps emotional concerns, or really how things have impacted them at a personal level. For the law, the most important thing is basically whether a specific behavior can be seen through the lens of a specific norm. Well, then the question is, how does law allow or stops people from being heard effectively, and what does that mean in the case of corruption? Right? Sorry, then my other question is then, how can performance art or different forms of art, what can we do to facilitate listening when the law fails? So basically, I am assuming, as you know, as you see, very often the law will fail for a number of reasons. There are, say, legal, philosophical, practical reasons, but the reality is the law will fail. So what can we do? So I created this Acts of Listening lab as a place where we can experiment with the problem of listening. In particular, I work with victims of violence, of political violence in exile in Canada. I'm right now focused on working with victims of the Colombian armed conflict and in exile in Quebec. And so the question is also how to use technology to facilitate listening. Since the 1950s or so, with a number of technologies, there is a big movement, lots of scholarship thinking about the role that technology plays in shaping listening, in facilitating listening, the use of microphones, the use of headphones, the use of mobile technology, all that, which might be interesting for, I think it was Adam, who's working on technologies for accountability, but probably for all of you, then the question is, how can we use also different technologies to facilitate listening together with performance? And so one thing to say is that victims are, and in particular victims of political violence, often are experience trauma. So it may be that in your context in corruption, you may not be dealing with trauma, but to me, in my case, the problem of trauma is really important. And in that sense, listening means also a question about how to support those who speak and those who listen, either psychologically with psychological support, but also by creating a methodology where they really feel that they are being heard. As you know, one of the big problems for victims of trauma, for instance, victims of sexual violence, is that there are big emotions such as shame, right? But also basically they feel that no one believes them or the system doesn't believe them, right? And there is another key problem for many victims, and that is that silencing is a force at place, right? So no one wants them to talk about things, so they are being silenced. So the big challenge is how to create a safe space where they feel they can break the silence. And we need specific, I would say, really specific places that can hold those spaces, like also acoustically, because they are safe, etc. And so I have done a number of projects. I just want to share one with you, but this one that I want to share is just to make a point, and that is that I think we are at an age where we are experiencing a reconceptualization both of justice and of art. And that is in particular in the area of transitional justice, you know, this justice that justice mechanisms used to facilitate the transitioning from violent conflict to a more democratic coexistence in different places like South Africa, like Colombia right now, with mechanisms such as a truth commission or a war tribunal. In transitional justice, is in particular, there is the idea that justice cannot just say, as if we go back here, justice cannot be just to make justice to one individual, but try to make justice to as many as possible, and simultaneously try to transform the conditions that made injustice possible. So it's a combination of justice and, in many ways, politics, right? You need to transform culture, transform institutions, transform relationships, transform also the perception that people have of the state. So in that sense, there is a big movement towards thinking or rethinking justice as a space where we apply not adversarial, I am jumping a little bit, but it's not adversarial principles, but trying to apply restorative principles. Right, restorative principles meaning where hopefully it's not about confrontation, but about bringing together victims, offenders, members of the community, institutions, and so that they are able to speak and tackle the problems that they have. So, and I think within art and performance, we are experiencing a similar change. I mean, it's not about the artists working in isolation, but the artists working together with communities, right? And the combination, in particular, what I do is a combination of oral history and performance. So oral history, as you probably know, is this method of research by which you do interviews, you gather information from people who have experienced the problem directly. And in that sense, you use technology, you record the conversation, then you analyze it, and then you use it for the purposes of your analysis. In my case, I work in collaboration with the victims. I ask them, why is it important that others hear what you have to say? Who needs to hear your story, right? And then how do we work together to transform your story into a performative experience so that the audience experience it in their bodies and not just intellectually?